Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, May 26th, 2017, and you're tuned in to episode 255 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Our top story of the day brings us to Maryland, where a judge has ordered that the state's Medical Cannabis Commission cease issuing any additional medical marijuana cultivation licenses for the next 10 days ahead of a June 2nd hearing at which he'll decide on whether to extend the ban or not. Circuit Judge Barry Williams said he wants to wait to make that decision until he hears of the outcome of a lawsuit filed against Maryland asking that the entire marijuana licensing process be thrown out and redone because the state failed to consider the racial diversity of license winners when calculating the scores of applicants, even though they were directed to do so by law. To be clear, the decision by Circuit Judge Williams only affects cultivation licenses, though obviously if a decision was made that the cultivation licensing process was invalid, it would most likely scuttle dispensary and processing licenses as well. Forward Grow, the only medical marijuana company so far to get their full license, will be allowed to maintain their freshly started cultivation operations, but will need to go to court next week to argue why they should be allowed to continue to do so. This is a big, messy story. They should click over to the Baltimore Sun for the full read. The Denver Post is reporting on allegations made against the Internal Revenue Service that their agents are using a Colorado seed-to-sale tracking database to crack down on state legal marijuana businesses deducting business expenses during tax filing season. According to the Post's reporting, at least 6 businesses have filed petitions in Denver's U.S. District Court asking that IRS summons for state marijuana sales records be denied. Until recently, the IRS has depended on businesses to self-report that they're involved in selling state legal marijuana, which would then be followed by that business losing the right to deduct standard business expenses thanks to Tax Code 280E, a provision put in place in the 1980s as a tool to be used against drug cartels, but that has become a favorite tool of today's feds to screw over the legal marijuana industry. Our final top story of the day is the news that marijuana-themed social network and online media producer MassRoots is in need of $5 million of further investment capital to stay afloat. The cannabis-focused social network said they spent $7.6 million in the first 3 months of this year, while only taking in just over $134,000 in revenue, making for a first quarterly loss of $7.4 million. According to the company's latest filings with the SEC, they will need to sell more stock in order to raise enough cash to fund their continuing operations. You can click over to Marijuana Business Daily's story on the whole thing to find a link to the SEC filing itself. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz it on headlines, let's quickly talk about the editorial intern spot we're hiring for. We need someone who is smart, driven, detail-oriented, and capable of running a sub-5-minute mile, though we'll likely have to be flexible on that last one. Do you or someone you know have 2 hours a day to spend helping me get all the day's industry news out to our listeners? Are you good in general with doing stuff on the interwebs? Can you take direction and operate under your own initiative to get things done? Can you juggle 5 clubs at once? Because if you can, that'd be super impressive. If you can do most of the things I mentioned and would like to hear more about the opportunity we're offering, swing over to mjtodaydaily.com/jobs. You won't get rich as our editorial intern, but you will learn a ton about the news of the industry and will be able to count yourself as one of the most informed people around, simply through work-enabled osmosis. Once again, if any of that sounds interesting, zip over to mjtodaydaily.com/jobs to learn more and to apply. That's mjtodaydaily.com/jobs. All right, time for the blitz. GW Pharma, the US-based pharmaceutical company that focuses on developing marijuana-derived medicines, said they plan to soon file for FDA approval for their drug Epidiolex after publishing the full results in the New England Journal of Medicine on Wednesday of a study that found that their cannabis drug was clinically effective in treating children living with epilepsy disorders. GW Pharma's Chief Medical Officer Stephen Wright said they would submit their FDA application for Epidiolex within the next month, with their European application to follow later this year. The Maine state legislature approved a bill yesterday to fund the newly forming adult use marijuana market voted in by voters in the fall. The bill now heads to the desk of Governor Paul LePage and also includes language shifting responsibility for industry oversight to the Bureau of Alcoholic Beverages and Lottery Operations instead of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, as a competing bill would have done. Governor LePage has 10 days to either sign or veto the measure before it would go into law without his signature. After the Florida State Legislature flailed on passing any kind of legislation expanding their medical marijuana program as mandated by voters in November, the reform ball was kicked to the State Department of Health to deal with. Yesterday, the DOH published a notice laying out their plans for how they would expand medical marijuana service as laid out by Amendment 2, the medical marijuana ballot measure passed by more than 70% of the voters in the fall elections. Faced with a deadline of July 3rd, by which time they need to have all the rules and regulations written, the Department of Health said that they would give the public 15 days notice before adopting any final rules, while also allowing for a 3-day period for public comments. In the end, their efforts could be for naught, as there's a lot of talk within the Sunshine State over calling a special legislative session so that state lawmakers can finish their work. We'll track this one as it develops. John Hiltz over at marijuana.com picked up on news out of France that the nation's newly appointed interior minister said his government planned on decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana by the end of the summer. France's current marijuana laws are pretty harsh in comparison to other countries in the EU, with even small amounts of marijuana bringing possible sentences of up to a year in jail and fines of up to €3,000. Oregon State released a report this week showing some of the stats behind the state's legal marijuana industry. According to the new report put out by the Oregon Employment Department's Workforce and Economic Research Division, a total of 3,506 people were employed at the 440 marijuana businesses that reported to the state. Those industry employees collectively earned $22.2 million in wages during the fourth quarter of 2016, with the average annual wage landing right around $25,000. Click over to Marijuana Industry News for all the details on this one. As always, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com and on our Twitter account at mjtodaydaily. As Hawaii very, very slowly rolls out their medical marijuana program, the state's medical marijuana patients just got a little closer to being able to purchase their medicine legally as the state's Department of Health granted a licensed dispensary the right to produce marijuana concentrates and products. Now, all that remains to be cleared before legal sales can swing up is for the state to give clearance to testing companies. This is another one we'll obviously be tracking. And finally for today, according to the latest fact book released by Marijuana Business Daily, in 2016, legal marijuana sales were right around the $4 billion mark, which everyone loves to point out is $1 billion more than the amount of Viagra and Cialis sold in the United States. The fact book also finds that the marijuana industry employs anywhere between 165,000 and 230,000 people, putting it neck and neck in overall numbers with dental hygienists and telemarketers. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again Monday morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our Twitter account at mjtodaydaily and visit our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to all our awesome Patreon listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the Patreon listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.